This is the Dirty Max Malibu, 2006 Chevrolet Malibu Maxx, and we're still chasing interior heating problems. Let's get into it. If you're with us on our last few videos, this 3500 V6 2006 Malibu Maxx, I mean, it's a really nice car. We had to do a lot of work to it. Doesn't say Max on it anywhere, but I think it's on the back, it says it. We had to do a lot of work to this car. This car came to us. We got it cheap off Marketplace. Needed head gaskets, intake gaskets. Somebody had obviously filled the engine up with some kind of stop leak, head gasket in a can, K-bar, something like that. They filled the car up. And when we got the car put back together, everything worked on it just fine, except had a couple of transmission codes, but that's for another video. But we could not get the interior heat. I'd get the interior heat working, I'd burp the whole entire system, and my granddaughter would drive it and wouldn't have no interior heat. After it sat overnight, it wouldn't have any interior heat. I did notice that every time we would shut it off, that overflow reservoir, that tank, this thing doesn't have a radiator cap. But this tank would always fill up to the point where it was under pressure after it sat overnight. Remember that. Now, looking back at it here, I know that I wish I don't have my old water pump, but we had a new thermostat in it. We thought it might be maybe the heater core was stopped up. And I went online, looked at all this stuff online. Thought the heater core was stopped up. We went ahead and flushed out the heater core. I just done a water flush on it with a hose. It flowed really good. And I thought, well, maybe that it's everybody on the internet saying that it's the blend door actuator that changes it from hot to cold, which I could hear it moving when I turned the key on and switched it from hot to cold on the dash, but it didn't sound like it was moving enough, so I went ahead and ordered a new blend door, got that put in, blend door actuator. I keep calling it blend door in all these videos, but it's a blend door actuator. And it's underneath the driver's side in the center. Coming in from the driver's side, it's up in the center console area behind the controls. It's pretty easy to get to. I didn't have a whole lot of trouble. I just got down in the floor and reached up in there and got it. Had plenty of light, no issues at all. Got that fixed. Blend door actuator was not the issue. After flushing it out, wasn't the issue. Changed the water pump, and it did increase the flow and help the engine stay a lot cooler, because the other one looked like it was maybe damaged or just didn't fit right. The aftermarket one didn't fit right, so I put a GM style water. No, actually, I put a cheap True Craft or something water pump back on it, so really it wasn't that nice either. Once I got everything going, I sat down here in the car. I turned it off, started it up, let it cool, heated it up. Worked fine. Everything worked just fine. The heat worked just fine. No issues. My granddaughter came over on a really cold night and tried to drive it up the road. She was going to drive it to town because she's put some gas in it. She's wanting to, get the use out of her gas, wanting to get the use out of her little car. She has insurance on it and no heat inside the cab. And wouldn't you know it, after it sat overnight, this overflow tank or reservoir tank was full to the top again. Strange. So that's when I decided I was going to look at the thermostat and open it all up and get down in there and look and see. And also that day before I changed the thermostat, the same day, I went ahead and I've got a pump. One of these drawers here. I just got a electric pump that hooks up to garden hose fittings, and I've got a few fittings that adapt it to the heater core. So I went ahead and took a bucket of fresh clean water and hooked it up to both inlet and outlet of the heater core, and then a chemical flush on it. And I'm not going to say what kind of chemical, because I don't want you guys putting caustic or acidic chemicals into your heater core. There's no reason for that. A lot of people use CLR. I've never tried that. That stands for calcium lime rust. It's a chemical for cleaning bathtub fixtures and things. I think it may be a caustic. I'm not sure if it's an acid or a base. But I'm not going to recommend any kind of chemicals. People use different things. Vinegar is one that somebody suggested. I used a mild chemical that brightens copper and aluminum that I mixed just a tiny little bit in the water, and I flushed it. Nothing came out. It had huge flow. That pump puts out quite a bit of flow, and it didn't impede the flow at all when it was hooked up. And I reversed it, ran it backwards through the heater core. No issues. So definitely not a plugged heater core. Nothing to do with the heater controls inside. But still, there was the issue of this reservoir tank. Every time you shut it off and let it sit for a while, it would fill completely up. Strange. But I remember back that my son and we had went through a few issues with a Chevrolet truck. It was a 92 model Chevrolet truck that has the remote tank, overflow tank. And we kept having issues with it. It would get hot and boil all the antifreeze out, but it would never cool right. And after went through all this, I'd done all this flushing, and I changed, of course, thermostat again, and went through and looked and make sure there's no blockages. Something that GM, I think there's a technical service bulletin, I believe, on these GMs. You can see some antifreeze down there, but that's just where I had the thing apart. There's this little tube here. It's hard to see. This little black tube that runs it from the water pump and the intake. Runs it all the way back over and runs to the heater hose. That's a little black tube. And that is your return. It pushes through the engine, then it returns through this and goes back, and the water pump, I guess, pulls it back through. And the other line comes out of the bottom, I think, of the water pump housing, and pushes, before it goes back to the radiator, pushes it through the heater core, I guess, after the water comes out of the block. That's your pressure. I don't guess it's really pressure side, but it's your hot side. So I checked all those, and some GM had some kind of thing where they was a TSB where they was requiring you to replace this little black tube. The only thing I can figure is this tube somewhere where this vent valve is. This is a bleeder. Is maybe it gets stopped up there or something. But I had all this stuff apart and looked at it. I couldn't find any issues with it. This tube was flowing really clear. Then that brings us back to this again. And if you'll notice, there's two lines on this overflow. And it's a reservoir overflow tank. Because, like I said, there's no cap on this radiator. Everything has to be up here. This is your highest point. This is where your gases and stuff need to bleed to. And on the older V6s, some of the older GM V6s, you've got a bleeder screw here. And you've got a bleeder screw over here next to where the thermostat housing is. The thermostat housing's right there. There's a bleeder screw. But on this engine, they've done away with that bleeder screw on this end. But if you notice, this little pipe that comes off, little pipe right there, this pipe comes all the way over and goes back in to this overflow reservoir tank. This little pipe in place of where the bleeder screw used to be. Now that's very important. Now, I've taken this hose off. And inside there is a little, it's like a metal, it's hard to see with this light, a little metal fitting inside here. Right there, there's a little metal fitting. Now, it's not a valve or anything. So you can take, I got these are carburetor cleaners. They're basically just guitar strings, really. And you can slide it right through there. There's no valve or anything in it, but this was all plugged. Maybe it was a valve at one time, but it was all plugged up. I run one of these bottle brushes to it, got this cleaned out. I started this engine, and after it ran, I thought it was topped off with coolant because this thing stayed full. This reservoir stayed full after you shut it off. But this is actually a steam vent. Instead of having two steam vents on the engine, now it's this line. Put it back up here. This line goes over to your radiator hose and your neck for your thermostat housing, it comes back up here into this reservoir tank and it vents. So this was plugged solid. And I've had this happen on a couple vehicles. I mentioned that truck earlier. It only had, the truck only had one hose that come in from the bottom of the overflow tank. And that hose was packed with rust on that Chevrolet truck that went back to the radiator, so it could never vent the gases out. It would always airlock the block on that truck, and it couldn't get those gases out of that little tube that went back to this overflow tank. So it would airlock every time you would fill it up, and no matter what you done. I even used, I bought one of them fancy kits that you draw your coolant down with and put it back in. Let me show you it. This is that vacuum coolant kit I was talking about. It's airlift, and it says original equipment approved. And if you ever watch in the background of like used to be Chip Foos, and you see bitchin' rides and those different channels where you see them guys filling the radiator, and they've got this air line hooked up to it. That's what this is. This is the air line is a Venturi, and it vacuums. It'll vacuum your system down. It'll pull it all the way down, and you just leave this vacuum on it for a while, and if it holds and the vacuum doesn't leak off, then your system is leak free. It's a leak tester, plus it's an autofill. When you've got a vacuum on it, you just hook one of these hoses up to your and this goes on the radiator cap or the reservoir, either one. It screws right in. It's got different adapters. And once you got a vacuum on it, you can hook your antifreeze, your coolant that's pre-mixed. And it's best to use pre-mixed coolant. You don't want to try to mix it after it's already in. It's just, you just can't never guess at it. Use pre-mixed coolant. Keeps you from having to buy distilled water. When you buy concentrate, you should always buy distilled water to put back in your cooling system, because it's about the only thing that works. If you put anything other than clean distilled water in there, the minerals in regular water will corrode your system. But that's a whole different story. But this system right here is a vacuum fill. It will actually fill your radiator back up without introducing any air into your whole entire cooling system. It will put nothing but coolant in. Once it equalizes, your coolant system should be full, and that should be all the coolant that it takes. Now, I've got a video somewhere of us using this, and we're probably going to use it again at some point. But this thing is one of the best investments we ever made. We even used this on that Chevrolet truck, and still could not seemed like we could not get the air out of the system. It would just boil over later. And the big thing was the reservoir was plugged, and it could not get the gas and liquids, coolant, back into the tank, so it couldn't purge itself. It couldn't burp the air out. So once we actually changed the reservoir tank on the Chevy pickup and the return line to the radiator, because it was packed solid with rust. And once we done that, the system worked perfectly. It was just a simple thing, but we had tried everything. We thought we had bad water pump. We just went through the whole entire, shot the parts can in it, just like I did this one without thinking. And this has happened on another vehicle. It was an HHR Blazer or something that we was working on. We had the same issue with it, but it would airlock. I never thought about this being a steam vent. And now that we've got that cleared out, and I run the engine a little bit after I cleared it out, and it started taking coolant then, and I ended up putting nearly an entire gallon more of coolant into this system after we got that steam vent fixed. It would actually relieve the gas pressure out of the engine, the pressure that it had, and I think most of the air was inside of the heater core. Somehow we couldn't get the heater core, because you notice the heater core is one of the only lines on the entire car that comes up above this reservoir. The only other line that comes above this reservoir to vent gas out is this one, and if that is plugged, all your air is going to go here to this other high point. And what you get an airlock in your heater core. So, or vapor lock, whatever y'all call it, it's air and no coolant. Even though the car might be circulating coolant through the engine, the highest point on this engine, when you take this out of the equation, is this heater hose line. So there's hundreds of videos out there, hundreds of things that people are doing. I've tried all of them, everyone has, and it could be just something as simple as this vent tube line that goes back into your coolant reservoir overflow tank being plugged, and that no longer becomes your high point. Your heater hose becomes your high point, and that's where all your air is going to go to instead of venting out over here. Now that it has pulled another gallon, this car's been sitting here overnight, it's pulled another gallon of fuel into it, and now it's exactly, well, it's hard to tell from this, it's right around the cold mark, and that's where it should be. But I actually, you know, I didn't lose any coolant when I changed anything, but I actually added more coolant because somewhere in there, I'm assuming the heater hose is where the airlock was. After I fixed all this, put it all back together, I started it, stopped it, drove it, did all kinds of different things. And what do you know, it's heating and it's putting, what, 150 degrees temperature out the dash. So amazing heat. Thing had amazing heat. I let it sit there and idle. It never even got cool while it was idling. It stayed hot. Circulation was fine. We had got the air out by introducing a new way for the air to get out, which was the old way, but it was just plugged. So if you're having this issue, before you start just firing the parts cannon like I did, go to this reservoir, check your overflow. Check the overflow, make sure it's not plugged. Check this one, your inlet for your steam port, and check the bottom down there, because you got a big hose that comes out the bottom. That's the main line to your radiator. But if you're filling it up and the radiator's not filling up, you know that one's clear if it's going in. So that one's harder to plug up than this one, because this has a little metal restriction in it that I guess works somehow as a steam, keeps it from just boiling all the water out into the overflow. But amazing, simple, and it should have been the first thing I checked because I've been through this before. But it's just a dumb mistake I've made over and over again, and I'm hoping getting this on film that you don't make the same mistake I did, because it's not necessary. And these little engines, from what I can see on the internet, that are notorious for vapor locking, and it could be just something as simple as that. Simple as just cleaning that little port. And also, I took the hose off on the thermostat end. It goes right there. You can see right where it tees off the thermostat housing right there. And I cleaned that end out too, just to make sure there wasn't a blockage there and here. And so it's clear all the way through, and it's working perfectly like it was intended to do. So that's your high point, and that's where your gases go, instead of your heater core line, which becomes your high point when this is blocked. Makes sense. Stupid mistake, rookie mistake, but we all have to mess up sometimes. I just hope I don't do it every time. I've been chasing this, and everyone knows when they get something on their mind, when you focus on one thing, that becomes the object. That's the shiny object. And the heater core, and the fact that the controls weren't changing in the heater core, became my shiny object. And I lost my mind trying to get air to flow through the heater core, and it really had nothing to do with that. That's just where the air was going when it was bound. But that's all I got for you guys. I do thank you for hanging out, and you guys are helping me on my way to the subscribers I need. Please subscribe if you like our content. If you have any suggestions for content, something you'd like to see us work on, we're getting ready to turn to the Nova sometime. When we get a couple days, we're going to take the front fenders off, may even take the whole front clip off. I'm going to go back through the engine again, even though the engine's probably got, I don't know, 5,000 miles on it. It sets a lot, and I just don't want it setting all the time. I'll go back through and check the valves, and I'm probably going to either put a smaller carb or redo the carburetor. We're going to tear the rear end out of it. A lot of work to come on the Nova. Stay tuned for that. My grandson's Cruise, we got a little work we're going to do on it. It keeps showing a catalytic converter code, and I'm convinced it's not, but I don't want to go down that parts cannon again with it. So we're going to dig a little deeper. But subscribe, share, hit that notification bell. That way when we put out a new video, you'll be the first one to hear it. I've been sick for the last little bit. I haven't been able to make any videos. Hopefully we're going to try to get out a couple videos a week. I'm going to do some work on this in a couple days. We're going to take this rear wheel off. I've got a brake caliper stuck. Like I said, this car sat for probably 2 years, and I think the rear caliper is stuck. So it's 4-wheel disc, I believe. Yes, it's 4-wheel disc. So we're going to get into that and see what the problem is there. It may just need the rotor turn, because the rotors are pretty raggedy. But come back and join us for our next video, and appreciate you guys watching. Stay clean, everybody.